the oath of allegiance and affirmation of office that I will read to each of you. So we are joined this morning by Brian Campion and Cynthia Stewart. After I administer the oaths, I will let each of them introduce themselves, and then I thought it would also be helpful if all of the board members could just, briefly introduce themselves and give a little bit of background. That did not happen when I joined the board, and it was kind of weird. Like, I just showed up. So I think it would be helpful just to, have those introductions. So let me start with the oath of allegiance, and I'm going to go in alphabetical order. So Brian, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
So this is the oath of allegiance to be followed by the affirmation of office. Do you, Brian Campion, solemnly affirm that you will be true and faithful to the state of Vermont, and that you will not directly or indirectly do any act or thing injurious to the Constitution or government thereof, under pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
Okay. And do you, Brian Campion, solemnly affirm that you will faithfully execute the office of member of the State Board of Education, and will therein do equal right and justice to all persons, to the best of your judgment and ability, according to the law, under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
Thank you. Okay, Cynthia, I will now administer the oath of allegiance to you, followed by the affirmation of office. Do you, Cynthia Stewart, solemnly affirm that you will be true and faithful to the state of Vermont, and that you will not directly or indirectly do any act or thing injurious to the Constitution or government thereof, under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
And do you, Cynthia Stewart, solemnly affirm that you will faithfully execute the office of member of the State Board of Education, and will therein do equal right and justice to all persons, to the best of your judgment and ability, according to law, under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to welcome you both here. So again, let me turn it, I'll just Brian first, and then Cynthia, if you'd just like to introduce yourselves and share with the board anything that you think is relevant. And I'm getting feedback from somebody. Okay, hopefully that's better. Nope. Brian, let me start with you.
It's coming from the Davis conference room.
I don't think it's me, but yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Very grateful to the governor for appointing me. Looking forward to working with all of you. I just came off of, I served in the state Senate for 10 years, and 4 years prior to that was in the House, and I chaired Senate Education for 4 of those years. Back in Bennington, I serve as the Director of Public Policy Programs at the Elizabeth Coleman Center for the Advancement of Public Action, which is at Bennington College. And at the ripe old age of 54, trying to finish my PhD in American and Canadian history. So I kind of took a break when I jumped into politics, and now kind of seeing the end. I mean, it'll be a little while, but it'll take a while to write that dissertation, but just thrilled to be here.
Thank you. Cynthia?
Thank you so much. Cynthia Stewart. I live in Concord, Vermont, which is in Essex County in the Northeast Kingdom. Grew up there and was in finance for many years. Most recently have worked in consulting, so helping businesses and municipalities and all kinds of entities, nonprofits, but feel passionate about education and about serving my community, and have been on the Kingdom East School Board, which was brought together 8 towns, 7 schools into one unified district, and did it very well. And also was a community member that supported the community when we closed a high school in Concord, Vermont, to allow high school kids to have more opportunities in adjacent areas and other schools of their choice. So that's my background, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So let me just go around the room. We are supported this morning by Maureen and Suzanne, who are basically the go-to people if you have any questions. We also have the Media Factory supporting our meetings. But for board members, let me start. I'm going to just go in alphabetical order. Mohammed.
Hey, you just wanted me to introduce myself, is that correct?
I'm sorry?
You just wanted me to introduce myself?
Sure. And just say like what it is that you do.
Okay, my name is Mohammed Job. I am a Vermonter, born in Northwest Africa, Mauritania. I work for Winooski School District as the Director of Multilingual Learner Programs, and I'm here as a member of the State Board of Education.
Thank
And
you.
happy to meet you both, Brian and Cynthia.
Great. Gray?
Hi, my name is Gray Farron. I'm from Virgins, and I'm one of the student members. Also, this is not what I normally look like, and to the other board members, I'm actually in the middle of our musical right now at the high school. Our first show is tomorrow, so I'm supposed to look like an evil 70s boss for the musical 9 to 5, hence the mustache. Um, yeah, I am a senior this year, so I'm the voting member of the two students, and I only have a couple of meetings left before I age out because I'm going to graduate.
Thank you. Caleb?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was making sure. So my name's Caleb Greenwood. I live in Troy, but I do school choice to Lake Region. I'm a junior this year. I started my first meeting, I think, August of 2024. So I'm pretty new to this as well, but I'm excited to do this. I've loved it so far. So welcome.
Great. Thank you. Lyle?
Good morning, Lyle Jepson, Executive Director of the Chamber and Economic Development in Rutland. Prior to 10-year stint here doing this work in economic development, I was in education for 30 years. And I still look 40, so that's all good. So that's my background.
Thank you. Tammy? Oh, I think I skipped over Tom.
Oh,
Either way.
Tom, you can go. LB4K.
LB4K.
I know. Well, that's what I was going to
Oh.
say.
No, I'm sorry.
It's fine. Tom can go.
Thanks. Welcome, Cynthia and Brian. Tom Lovett, living now in Waterford after 40 years in St. Johnsbury, and been on the board since 2021. Longtime headmaster of St. Johnsbury Academy, now teaching part-time at the Academy and at Good Shepherd Catholic School.
Thank you. Tammy, with my apologies. I'm going to be singing the ABC song for the rest of the day.
That's okay. Good morning, Brian and Cynthia. Welcome to the board. Tammy Colby. I have been in Vermont for quite a while, but most recently as a tenure faculty member at University of Vermont in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies. But I stepped away from that 2 years ago to take on a role for a large national think tank in DC. My background is in education policy, in particular education finance and funding policy and special education. And I now work exclusively with districts and schools nationwide, but also the U.S. Department of Education, which I don't really know what that means anymore, on policy issues of policy development and policy implementation. So welcome to the board. We're thrilled to have you both.
Thank you. Rich?
Hey, my name's Rich Werner. I'm down in Dover, Vermont. I've been I was chairman of the Dover School Board for some odd years, 20 years, 18, till we consolidated with Wardsboro, and then I became chair of the River Valleys. I'm also been chair 2 different times for about 20 years for Wyndham Central Supervisory Union. I worked for the town of Dover for 30 some odd years, and I retired. And like the other gentleman, I don't look 40. I look like twice as old as I really am. I'm really excited about having Brian on the board because I got to meet with Brian a bunch of times during different school legislation, and he would come over to Wilmington because he was Wilmington senator for a little while, I believe, or I wasn't sure if it was that or because he was the head of the Senate Ed committee. He was a great guy, and I'm really excited to have him there. And Cynthia, I'm glad excited to have you on the board too, and hopefully we can do a lot of good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just
Hey, Jennifer,
Just-
I realized I forgot to mention, I live in Plainfield, Vermont. So that's where I'm from.
And just to round this out, I am Jennifer Deck Samuelson. I live in Winhall. My husband and I have 3 daughters that have all made it through the Vermont school system and are doing, wonderful things that are reflective of their particular interests. So, they had a fantastic education, and along the way, I was able to help out in their schools in a variety of ways. Also, did a brief stint as a assistant teacher in law school, but I've really seen our educational system more as from the parent side. I am a lawyer, and I'm also the chair of the Winhall School Board. I joined that in 2017, and I've been the chair since 2018. So thank you all. So with that, let me turn it to our next agenda item, which is the public to be heard. If there are any members of the public who wish to be heard, if you're on the Teams platform, you can press the raise hand icon. If you're calling in, it's *5 to raise your hand. I see Alyssa Chen. And before I turn to you, I always forget to sort of set the table on this one. We do ask members of the public to limit themselves to about 2 minutes. And if you have anything in writing that you would like to submit, we can include that with our meeting minutes. And this is your time to address the board. The board may not respond during public comment. It's not a question and answer session. Depending on what the comment is, I may follow up with you directly, or it may turn itself into a topic for discussion at a future board meeting. So with that, welcome. And Alyssa, let me turn to you first.
Cool, thanks so much. Just to introduce myself, my name's Alyssa Chen, grew up in Vermont, went to schools in Rutland County. I currently work at the Education Justice Coalition of Vermont, and so I'm reading this letter by Britta Fisher, who's a member of ours, on behalf of the Education Justice Coalition. Yeah, and I'm also kind of Jewish. My mom's family is Jewish and a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. And so some of what Britta wrote is also related to myself. So I'll go ahead and read that. I think you already received this letter, but I just wanted to read it at the meeting. Dear members of the Vermont State Board of Education, as a Jewish resident of Burlington, a member of Jewish Voice for Peace, and an educator at a Vermont public school, I'm writing to express my support for the IRIS Vermont State Ethnic Studies Standards Framework in its current form. I feel called to write both to support the powerful framework and because of the request from the Shalom Alliance to name Jewish people as a specific group within the framework as a way to combat anti-Semitism in Vermont. I also want to raise that the Shalom Alliance does not speak for me, nor do they represent the views of all Vermont Jews. It is my belief that Jews do not need to be highlighted over other marginalized groups facing oppression, especially since there are many marginalized groups who are not also specifically identified within the framework. The clarity of the definition of discrimination within the framework is sufficient. Furthermore, I find the request from the Shalom Alliance to exclude colonialism and imperialism from the education standards out of fear that it might lead to attacks on Israel to be disturbing. I think in these times, it is critical to keep having these discussions as a way to prevent ignorance and division, which fuels anti-Semitism. Yeah, and I just kind of lift up that part around colonialism and imperialism. Like, let's think about how this country was founded, and to try to take that language out of our discourse is very disturbing, and it would kind of like wipe away our own history of like how we got this land and the impact that we had on wiping out Native people. And so I just want to emphasize that last part of that language being important to include votes for its history, and also kind of the way colonization has had like current repercussions on global people throughout the world. Yeah, and neocolonialism in our economy, etc. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Okay, I see Deborah Stolaroff and then Kim Gleason. I think I could see you're having trouble unmuting. Let me, if it's okay with you, Deborah, let me turn to Kim, and you can Let's see if we can get you unmuted, and then I'll come back to you after Kim, if that's okay. Oh,
I just figured it out. Sorry,
great.
I'm I'm used to Zoom. So my name's Deborah Stolaroff. I'm a public school educator of 30 plus years and a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. Alyssa's testimony was similar to mine. We sent in a letter, Jewish Voice for Peace sent in a letter to you guys in February, but I'm going to read some of that as from here. It's Jewish Voice for Peace's understanding that you received letters from Shalom Alliance regarding language in Iris. In those letters, Shalom Alliance says they speak for Vermont Jews. This is not true. There is not one organization that speaks for all Vermont Jews. Jewish Voice for Peace, representing over 800 Vermont Jews, which includes active and retired Vermont educators, has a different perspective. We believe IRIS, as written, is already a powerful resource and tool for Vermont educators. Shalom Alliance points to the surge in anti-Semitism in Vermont as the reason for their request. We disagree with their claim. Much of the Vermont data on anti-Semitism over the past year includes a public criticism of Israeli policy. Conflating anti-Semitism with the constitutional right to protest actions on the part of the Israeli government is misleading. Anti-Semitism targets the Jewish religion. That's very different from disagreeing with the actions and politics of a government. In addition, Shalom Alliance has requested that language within IRIS be modified to explicitly include Jewish people. Given that genocide is already addressed within the framework, we believe Jewish people are implicitly included. Indeed, the Holocaust is the primary lens through which most Vermont schools teach about genocide. Highlighting one marginalized group above the other diminishes recognition of various communities who also endure similar levels of Semitic oppression. Finally, Shalom Alliance is requesting that colonialism and imperialism be excluded from Vermont's educational standards, as they believe this might lead to attacks on Israel. JVP believes silencing the teaching of historical impact on these topics, which have shaped global power dynamics, is what contributes to the rise in anti-Semitism. Avoiding these crucial discussions, we risk perpetuating ignorance and division, which only fuels hatred and undermines the opportunity for meaningful and inclusive dialogue. Jewish Voice for Peace looks forward to being included in any future conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and IRIS, which is a very important ethnic studies framework that we really appreciate. And thanks for letting me speak. We sent, as I said, we already sent a letter in February. I don't know if it's, I think it's been recorded in the smaller committee, but yeah, I'm right, Tammy? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. I know that Maureen has entered it into as a part of our public comment. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Kim Gleason, former board member, welcome.
Good morning, friends. Yes, I am Kim Gleason. I have lived in Grand Isle full time for the last 3 years, and before that for 25 years in Essex, where we raised our 4 kids and where I served on the school board for nearly 15 years. So I join you this morning as a newly non-state board member, but I wanted to hop in and just invite and encourage that, particularly in this very dynamic time in the education landscape in Vermont, that the State Board of Ed really lean into your responsibilities as an independent body and bring voice to those conversations as an independent body. And that you continue to tend to the statutory responsibilities that are unique to the State Board of Ed, and those go beyond just the rules and regulations and standards, but I do encourage, of course, that you tend to those and continue to do so with the intentionality that we have done so in the past. Though many of our statutory responsibilities rely on the AOE to do their job first, the current system lacks the type of accountability and transparency that our students and educators need. So I'll continue to ask the State Board tend to the backlog of 59 renewals, to include, and if not most importantly, the 18 therapeutic schools, which the AOE said they would not be reviewing, but serve our most vulnerable students and families with the least oversight. I can imagine there where this was supposed to have begun in the spring, maybe that's more April than March for the AOE. I don't really know what the plan is on that, but they had been intentional to say they would not be addressing the backlog on therapeutic schools. And while there is question of what will happen with independent schools and public tuition moving forward, I understand that therapeutic schools have been carved out of those proposals that are out in the universe right now, making it all the more important that those renewals are tended to with the responsibility that we have, you all have as a state board, and that we owe students and families. I think that we had also agreed that we were expecting to review, you all as a State Board of Ed, the CTE rules, and those were relying on a first draft from the AOE. Again, I will say we have to figure out the strategy that allows the State Board of Ed to operate independently and tend to its responsibilities, even if the AOE is not tending to their piece that allows that work to move forward. We, as we have noted, the governor oversees and appoints the secretary and appoints the State Board of Ed. So if the State Board were to consider to continue to see challenges in moving your responsibilities forward, perhaps that's where the conversation would need to happen to reconcile those challenges. I do see on the list of items recommended revisions to the CTE rules, but I just wanted to point out to you all that that link is not up on the list of materials for today's meeting. So if it's going to be addressed, I hope that that link will be added to the materials. And I'll look forward to listening in on that conversation because I know that's a big body of work. And I look forward to seeing how the state board will move those rules forward. I deeply appreciate the time and attention you all bring to this work. And I am grateful. I'll be staying tuned and looking to be available to the extent I can. Please also focus on your governance as a body. I look forward to seeing what you guys have in mind for roles and responsibilities. I think that tending to doing your best as a body on good governance will help you plan for a well thought through agendas through the course of the year and strategies to even address, if not able to attend to, those things that require resources you don't have in a thoughtful manner, a calendar for the year. So thank you all so much. Good luck and enjoy your time. Welcome,
Thank you.
new board members.
And we don't have CTE on the calendar today. I don't know.
Didn't see it on the calendar. I see item K. Says recommended revisions to the State Board of Ed rules series. That must be under the secretary's report. So
maybe.
Item K said that document says recommended revisions. So it's not a hot link. It doesn't show up. So I don't know if Zoe's got something coming or to what extent she intends to cover it. But I know it is in the responsibility list that the state board had expected to be doing this year. But it was, as I understand it, awaiting a first draft from the AOE. And again, I think that to the extent that state board's ability to do your job is limited by what the AOE chooses to forward to the state board, I think that is a problem in the system.
All right. Thank you, Kim. Good to see you.
You're welcome. Good to see you guys.
Okay, this brings us to our next well, and let me just see, because we've got just a couple minutes left. I want to make sure that I didn't miss anyone for public comment before I move on. I don't see anyone else. We will have time again at the end of our meeting. So I'm going to close public comment for now and move on to our next agenda item, which is to approve our State Board of Education meeting minutes from our February 19th, 2025 meeting. Do I have a motion?
I'll move that.
Okay, moved by Rich. Is there a second?
I'll second it. Oh, Tammy, go ahead.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving our Well, actually, I know we're going to have some abstentions. Maureen, would you mind doing a roll call? This is to
Can you hear
approve
me?
our minutes. Yes.
Jennifer, before you do that, are you looking for us to abstain? Is that what you're?
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand that.
I'm not sure if that's me or,
Oh, I
It's
think
the
it is.
AOE site.
Okay. I will mute myself. Oh,
Okay.
is that better?
That is better, but I didn't understand what you asked.
So were you looking for us to abstain since we were not in attendance? Is that what you were? Got it.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you can bear with the feedback while I do a roll call vote. I'm all by myself here being quiet, but apparently there's feedback coming through here. So Tom Lovett,
Yes.
Cynthia Stewart,
Abstain.
Mohammed Job,
Yes.
Richard Werner,
Aye.
Tammy Colby,
Yes.
Ray Farron,
Yes.
Lyle Jepson,
Yes.
Brian Campion.
Abstain.
Will the chair be voting?
Yes, in the affirmative. Thank you.
7-2.
Okay, thank you. So board announcements, I've got a couple. Do any other board members have announcements they'd like to make? Lyle, I see you.
Did that mean Lyle go?
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
all right. I know people are tired. I know people are tired of hearing about robotics, but here we go again. The season has begun, and we have most recently been to WNEU in Springfield, where the iBots from Rutland, their coalition of 3 teams, came in 3rd out of 36 teams. We're excited about that. There is a lot of robotics activity going on in the state of Vermont, and we're very pleased that that is growing. So the iBots are off to WPI this weekend, UVM the next weekend, the Big E the weekend after that, with the goal of trying to get back to Houston, but stay tuned. Who knows? The excitement continues.
And just as a reminder, Lyle, how did the team do last year at nationals or internationals?
They came in 3rd. Well, no, they came in 16th internationally of 640 teams. So they did pretty well. Vermont teams, Vermont kids, Vermont educated kids going out there, making us proud.
Thank you. And I appreciate the updates. It's always fun to know what's happening just in our schools, and Lyle is a coach for the iBot. So I think last year you tuned in live from Houston from one of our board meetings.
He tried to tune in, but that was difficult. And I'm not really a coach. I'm a driver. I just drive them wherever they want to go, and I buy food.
Yeah, equally important.
Two things I know how to do.
Thank you, Lyle. Mohammed, did I see that? Yes, let me turn to you.
Yes, I'd like to invite everyone, if it's not too far from you, to come down to Winooski School District tomorrow evening. The event starts at 6:30. We call it Iftar. This month is Ramadan, where Muslims observe fasting, and our students, all religions are welcome, obviously. It's a huge potluck. If you are interested in international food, you don't have to bring any food, you are a guest. And you can learn from our different cultures as well. Just an invitation. We do this every year during this month.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
Any other board announcements? Okay, so I have just a couple. One, Zoe had contacted me earlier this morning just to say that she's going to be late and is hoping to arrive by about 9:30. So I just wanted to share that. My next announcement is, as Gray mentioned when he was introducing himself, we have 2 student members. By statute, they typically serve a 2-year term. The first year is as a non-voting member. The second year is as a voting member. And we will be losing Gray June 30th because his term will expire and he will graduate and go off to do exciting things. So this will also be posted in the AOE's weekly field memo, but the governor's office is now accepting applications for a new student member for a 2-year term beginning July 1st. Interested applicants can find the online application on the governor's webpage under boards and commissions, or they can email a resume and indication of interest to, and I'm going to spell this out, but it's exe.appointments@vermont.gov. And again, I will also include this as a link in our minutes, just so people don't have to write it down. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Maureen or Suzanne. Then my next announcement is that Tammy and I testified before the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Appropriations Committee regarding the board's budget request. We lost the window for getting increased funding for FY25, but I do sense a fair amount of interest and acknowledgement that the board really needs more funding to execute its responsibilities. So lots of interest and support on both sides from both Senate and House in terms of, really looking at FY26 and beyond, and, really standing up more resources for the board. So we had a good testimony and a lot of questions from both committees. No answers yet. I think that will, sort of be as the months go on, and I did offer that Tammy and I could come back once we have a better understanding, with shifting landscapes about what the board's responsibilities will be. And I was fairly clear, one, that the board will do anything that we are asked to do, because I think there's a lot of good interest and dedication by board members. But two, that anything that we are asked to do needs to be financially supported to allow us to do that work. So I think that message was received. And Tammy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I don't think so. I think, in all of our testimony, what we've been sort of stressing is the importance of the board, and sort of reiterating back to the General Assembly some of the key points that the board sort of came to an agreement on when we had our special meeting around our perspective on where the rules should remain with the board. And so we have shared that as well as our budget request for additional funding to make sure that we can continue our work on the rules, in particular modernizing the sort of the canon of rules.
Great. And then my last board announcement is just, I included in the agenda packet more as an FYI, a memo that has been issued by the attorneys general of 13 states and DC, including Vermont, that provides guidance in response to a few executive orders that have been issued by the president. And there was a Dear Colleague letter that came out from the Department of Education. So just wanted to put that out there and have that in the public record, just as a piece of information. So, Tammy.
I just wanted to add, I know in this, I believe that all of you are receiving from the U.S. Department of Education these Dear Colleague letters directly by virtue of the fact that you are on the state board. And so I know that that has created a lot of confusion in the field. And so I think the attempt here is by the state and by Vermont and other states is to gain some clarity around those executive orders, as well as sort of stake out the constitutional position of sort of what the state's role is here and what the federal role is. And I was in DC last week in meetings around a lot of this. So I'm happy to answer additional questions about sort of what's going on the federal level, if that's helpful to you.
Are board members receiving the Dear Colleague letters? I don't think I got one. I think I found out about it.
They've been coming to me directly to my state board account from the U.S. Department of Education, addressed as, so I assumed everybody else was getting them. Are they not?
I don't think
okay.
So.
All right. I will start forwarding them to me. For some reason, I'm on their radar screen for probably a whole host of reasons, but they are coming to me in my board capacity. So that's okay. So I'm glad I checked. I will forward them along to everyone. But I'm also happy to answer other questions if that's helpful to people.
Thank you. All right, if there's nothing further, I will turn it to Gray to start off the student report.
Awesome.
And
Yeah.
you can go back to your mustache.
uh yeah, that's like I said before, that's because of the musical, which is this week. We've been working on it for a while, so it's nice that it's all coming together. You know, Virginia's, we're a pretty small school, but we have a very solid music program. I actually just earlier this month we also, you know, we had people going to the New England's Music Festival for band and chorus. We have the All-State Music Festival coming up. Districts was last month. We have a pretty well-rounded music program, and I'm excited about the musical. Our shows are tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday. And as I've mentioned before, we're doing 9 to 5, which is the musical based on the Dolly Parton movie. And I am the evil boss, which is why I have the mustache. Um, and yeah, besides that, oh, well, our school budget passed, which I'm really excited about because last year it took us 3 tries for that to happen, and I'm excited to not go through that again. It passed on the first try this time, which is how it was for our district for about 2 decades. But after last year, everyone was a little on edge about it, and we didn't have to cut any programs or anything. So that's a win for us, and I'm very happy about that. And I actually have not been in school a bunch for the past month, just for different programs and things and between break. So I can't report on a lot of the things that have been happening, but spring sports are starting this week or next week. And the math team had their last meet this week, so the math season is over. And that's pretty much all the stuff that's been happening in school, at least that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Gray. Any comments or questions from board members before we turn to Caleb? All right, Caleb, I will turn to you.
All right. So this is only our 3rd week back from break, I believe, and it's a 3-day week because at our school, so this Thursday, so tomorrow, we have what's called folio tasks, and they basically function as a way to like develop skills. So like we have 4 categories. There's informed thinker, communicator, collaborator, and like 2 other ones. So basically it just works as a way to like develop like learning skills, collaboration skills, stuff like that. And there's a required amount to graduate. I think you need like 15 or 16 in each category, which each class is required to have a certain amount. So usually it isn't too much of a problem, like a graduation requirement. It's not a huge barrier or anything. But I think starting this year, I don't think we had them any year prior. We have these days that act as recovery days, or like golden ticket days is what they call them. So basically your teachers let the like principal know, or the guidance like office know, these are the students that need to come in to finish folio tasks, missing work, stuff like that, and then everyone else gets the day off. So it still counts as a school day, but it also helps students get back on track and help them from falling too far behind. So, and we also don't have school Friday. So this was a really short week for me. I've only had 1 full week back since break, and since even before break, we haven't had very many long weeks. This year's been kind of odd in that way. We haven't had a lot of 5-day weeks. Our spring sports are starting on the 24th, so next Monday. We have an ACT date tomorrow. And I think that's about it.
All right. Well, and it's interesting to hear how your school handles helping students who are behind and helping them to sort of stay on track. Because I think there are lots of different ways that schools might employ to address that. And so it's always interesting to hear like different ways that different schools do that.
Yeah, I think this works pretty well just because it doesn't make us stay longer like through the summer, but it also like it's not like it's really changing the school week that much for people who are behind.
Right, right.
So yeah, I think it functions pretty well.
Thank you. Any comments or questions for Caleb?
Yeah, Caleb, as a junior, our juniors just did the state testing yesterday. Is that going on at your school too?
I actually talked about that with one of my teachers, I think yesterday. We were actually talking about, we don't know when the date is, but I know that we are going to do it. I just don't know when, but it should be sometime pretty soon.
All right. Well, Caleb, thank you. This concludes our student report, which brings us to our changed agenda item. So just to recap, at the February monthly board meeting, the board voted to create a legislative committee. And just because of competing schedules, Tammy and I were not able to find a time to meet with Mohammed, who's our other member on the Roles and Responsibilities Committee. So just in an effort to kind of keep things moving along, I drafted something that I thought captured what I heard the board, from our discussion in February. I'm going to try to share my screen. This is always a little bit clunky, so bear with me, but I'm going to put the proposed language up, and let's just see. I don't want a Chrome tab. Well, let me do this. Hang on. Let me pull up in the email. I don't know if anyone has a better way. I can share my email from last night, and I have a document, but it's not, connected to Chrome. And I could put it in the chat, but can members of the public see it if I put it in the chat? Oh,
If you email it to my work account, Jennifer, I can pull it up. I just can't. I'm on a different computer.
okay, let me just copy this. Thank you, Tammy. And I apologize for.
Maybe while you do that, I can provide an update on, I could just go on to the next agenda item, update on the Student Performance Standards Committee.
Okay.
That's
Sure.
just because that's going to be quick and we can keep the agenda. So we're going to jump quickly to agenda item number 8, the update on the Student Performance Committee. You did hear this morning some public comment on some of the aspects of the IRIS standards. Given the executive orders and Vermont's careful review of those executive orders, we are just sort of in a holding pattern on the standards committee with respect to the IRIS standards. I don't anticipate that that's a forever hold. I think that that's just a temporary hold until we can have it sort of get oriented to sort of what sort of the scope and requirements are for those executive orders, and making sure that any standards that we put out are both consistent with our education quality centers, the EQS, but also take into account, to the extent that we need to, and I think that's part of what we need to sort out, any of the new executive orders. So we did not meet in the last few weeks. And right now we're just in a pause, but I do want to stress that that's not a permanent pause. And certainly the public comment we received this morning will be taken, we'll take that into account as we move forward. So just a quick update. And I think I'm chairing that committee. Going forward, we'll be adding another member to that committee. Obviously, Kim Gleason has cycled off.
Thank you, Tammy. Any comments or questions about that before we go back to item G? Okay.
I would say both Brian and Cynthia, if the IRIS standards are something that are new to you, please reach out. I can give you a copy of those, and I'm happy to sort of bring you up to speed on where we are in the process of thinking through those.
And Tammy, did you get my email? You haven't gotten it? I wonder.
Tammy, can you send a copy of the IRIS standards? I have read them once, but don't have a copy.
Yeah, I'd appreciate a copy as well.
I can do that, and maybe I'll look for a time for the three of us to just talk as a group, and I can sort of bring you up to speed. That wouldn't be a meeting. It
That'd
would
be
just
great.
be me introducing sort of, I can
I'd
talk
love
through
it.
the Iowa standards with you. So I put it into a Word document, Jennifer, and should everybody can see this, I hope.
Thank you.
And Maureen, I can email this to you as well after we're done. But it also, I'm in a Word document, so if we need to wordsmith, I can do that.
Okay. So, and I'll just read this out loud. So this is the proposed charge for the committee. The Vermont State Board of Education Board Legislative Reporting Committee is formed for the purpose of keeping board members informed about legislative activities while preserving the board's independence and neutrality. Committee members are responsible for following legislative matters that may impact the board's actions and responsibilities, reporting back to the full board at regular intervals so as to keep board members informed, and facilitating the board's discussion of such matters. When invited by members of the General Assembly, committee members may summarize the board's discussion of a particular issue, and if the board has voted on an issue that is of relevance to the General Assembly, to communicate any official action taken by the board. The committee shall be comprised of the board's chair and vice chair, plus 2 additional board members. So I will open this up for discussion if there are any suggested edits. I'm not hearing any.
Also, I also just put it in the chat. Yeah, I know that people engage with written material different ways. So if you're having a hard time seeing it on the screen, you also can see it in the chat. The one question I had, Jennifer, is, and I don't know if this is something that's implied, or if we want to be explicit about it, is I think one of the things we wanted to make sure is that there was some mechanism for, if you and I are called in to testify in front of the legislature, that it's informed by the board's discussion. Is it the case that the legislative reporting committee would be informing that testimony, or like how do we envision that working going forward? Because I think we've had thus far, our testimony has been informed by sort of a larger discussion of the full board. Are we still thinking that that's going to be the model, or would it be informed by committee discussions or synthesis?
So I mean, that is a good question. And just to, refer back to our February discussion, I had strongly indicated that I don't think that this committee should be an executive committee. I don't think that this is for people speaking on behalf of the board without having the option or the opportunity to consult with the full board. I mean, obviously, you and I, Tammy, are named as members of the board, but if I were a regular board member, I wouldn't feel comfortable delegating my voice to someone else. I would want the opportunity to be able to speak about it. So what I'm envisioning is that this committee will follow, what's going on in the legislature. We will have regular updates, so during the legislative session, it would be at every board meeting. It would probably slow down when the legislature is not in session, although there is always stuff percolating in the background. And at our board meetings, when we're providing updates, there would be a board discussion about whatever our report entails. If the board takes action and comes to a vote, as we have done, that we would be able to report back on a vote and speak for the board. If there's not a vote, we would be able to report back and summarize the board's discussion. But I think to your specific point, what happens if we are called in before we have a board meeting to be able to talk about it? It's kind of an imperfect science. And I think, my preference would be to try to arrange a special meeting of the full board. If it's an issue of like real importance, for instance, what is the board's response to the governor's education transformation proposal? That was a pretty hefty issue that I felt warranted a special meeting for us to be able to report back on the board's response to it. So it's not a great answer. And I think, what I've tried to communicate to legislative committees is this is our cadence of meetings. And if we can be invited after, like if I know that there's something that they want to talk to us about, if we can schedule our testimony to occur after a board meeting, that's really helpful. And if it's something that really has to happen more quickly than that, that we would hold a special meeting. Gray?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't think we should, take away any of the meetings that we have or even special meetings that we have to, inform what you're going to say in your testimony. But I don't think that the legislative committee giving advice to inform testimony is, inherently stops that. I think in the past when we had talked about it a bit, we had talked about putting in language that would say, to some extent, the legislative committee in meetings with you and Tammy, advise you on that testimony. And I think that can still happen without it taking away from the full board's decision making into that. I think, like you said, large decisions especially should still be made by the full board, and the full board should discuss them, often with special meetings. But especially for more minor stuff, I think a legislative committee that can give advice is still helpful. And I think that really just spreads out the decision making in the testimony process opposed to consolidates it, because as even you and Tammy make some decisions independently of the board in terms of what you say in testimony, and that's just always going to be how that works. So I think to have a slightly larger body there in terms of the legislative committee, which I assume would be half or 2/3 you and Tammy anyways, would expand that a little bit. And I don't think it hurts to throw in a sentence about that.
So, and I think if I'm understanding you, this would allow perhaps a 4-person committee to, be following testimony, and that 4-person committee to meet, and among the 4 of them come up with something, and then, Tammy and I could reflect back to the legislative committee. This was what the committee discussed. It does not represent a conversation by the whole board, but this is just what 4 people discussed. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's possible too. I think that makes sense. I just my biggest thing is that I don't think having that committee has the negative effect that I think we've suggested it has a few times, because I don't think we have to do it in a way that actually takes away from a larger board discussion.
Lyle and then Rich.
I think Brian would know better than any of us, but I don't think the timing is always going to be of our making. I think there are times when committees say, could you come in on Wednesday, and it's Tuesday? And so I think that we may need to provide the flexibility that Gray is suggesting to the committee.
So, and again, maybe the answer there is not having the board delegate its voice, but that, if Tammy or I or, anyone else is requested to testify on an issue, that we would be very clear that we've not had an opportunity to discuss this as a full board. And, if I were the one testifying, that I would say, based on prior board discussions, this is what I feel like I've heard board members say. This is my personal opinion, but I don't have a full board response because the board has not met. And if you would like a full response from the board, then I will need to, go back to the board and have a conversation about it.
Yeah, it just adds another level, right? Because that's true even right now. There are some times where you might be called and you would have to say the board has not discussed this in full yet, and other times where we have discussed in full. There's just has an in-between step where you have the possibility of saying the full board hasn't had a chance to meet with this, but 4 of us met and talked about it. So I just think that is helpful.
Okay. Rich.
I think I'm on the same page as Gray and everybody else. We used to get things from the court, and it would say, this is not a full court decision. I think they call them slip decisions. And I think, you know, we are going to have the chair and the vice chair that I think have a very good feel for where the board is going. So I think if we just put in that, you know, if it's not a caveat, if it's not an item that has been discussed by the full board, you can say we're speaking on as the chair and vice chair in this subgroup, but it's not a full board decision or a full board discussion. As long as you put that caveat out there, then we can come back and you can say, this is what I said. You can have a discussion with the full board, and then we can write something to submit to that committee to say that, you know, after a full board discussion, you know, they were in agreement, and I think that also covers what the concerns Kim had in the past.
Okay. I'll let Tammy finish typing.
I'm just trying to make some notes as we go along of what I'm trying to synthesize. The other thing I might mention that has come up, and I think it's related to this, but not specific to this, so maybe we can just put a pin in it, Jennifer, is I do think that in December, you know, prior to the legislative session, you know, we can get an update perhaps from the legislature on the issues that are coming up as a full board, and this committee then could sort of be contemplating those issues in a proactive way. You know, I think we do that informally, but I think having sort of a marker on the table where in November, December, or even early January, right? Like we're sort of being anticipatory, and here are several issues that we are seeing that are likely to come up where we can, as a full board, have it just, you know, say this committee then could recommend, you know, here are 2 or 3 issues that we anticipate being hot topics this session. We can then, you know, the committee can identify those, provide some structure around a conversation for the board, and then we can proactively have those conversations. I think that also helps sort of short circuit some of the concerns about just the committee providing advice. And so I don't think that goes in the text here, but as we start to think about what a board's calendar might look like for the year and what the work of this committee might be, I think that could be really useful.
And I'll be honest, like I did have that on my calendar for this past December, but then we lost the Senate Education Chair that we otherwise might have invited in to talk to us about upcoming issues. And all of the committees were kind of in a state of flux. So I didn't propose it this year, but I think going forward, it would be really helpful to really set the table.
Certainly not a critique, but I think especially since we have a legislative, if we're going to have a legislative committee, then having that update and then from that, the legislative committee could do some work and then come back to the full board to help facilitate. I'm noticing in here, the committee would facilitate a discussion. And so, you know, I see these as an and in both.
Right. Ryan?
Thanks. I guess I'm just looking for some clarification. So could you just give me a scenario, Jennifer, where how this would all work, just to bring me back to what the goal is with this committee and its interplay with the education committees?
Yes, so it used to be that the board would regularly receive legislative updates from the agency. And for the last couple of years, that hasn't happened, it certainly hasn't happened on a regular basis, which, you know, any board member obviously can pull up, you know, various legislative committee agendas and see what's coming down the pike for the week. But the board, I think by and large, has felt like there's a lot happening in the legislature that maybe the full board is not aware of, and that this would allow, you know, kind of formalize this expectation that at least some board members will be closely following what's happening in the legislature and then report back to the full board so that the board is just informed of what's going on. But you know, on the flip side of that is, and I put this language in there, you know, we are a neutral body. And so it didn't feel appropriate to me that the board would be, you know, advocating for certain things. I mean, I think my thought is that, you know, we are taking in information and then, you know, because a lot of this stuff does affect the board. And frankly, I mean, there have been things passed in bills that implicate the board and no one tells the board. And then, so the hope is that it will just kind of close the loop on all of this.
Sure. So that sounds great. Sounds incredibly important. So so then what about testifying before the education committees? Can you help me with that? It's not as though, so this is my only, I appreciate everyone mentioning the caveat and, when going, I'm just trying to understand who might go before the State Board of Education. And I realize it happens once in a while, or the education committees, without sort of a unanimous coming out with a statement, not a personal statement, but maybe a minority statement without the whole state board having sort of given its approval. That's what I guess I'm just looking for clarification on.
So, as we had this discussion at our February meeting, I was reflecting on, the times that I've been called in to testify, and it kind of falls into, 3 buckets. One is, I have found, through being the chair, that every January I get invited by both House and Senate Ed to talk about the State Board of Education and to give an overview of the state board. So that is not anything that I have felt the need to get, approval from the board before going in to speak about it. I mean, this is really in statute what the board is charged with doing, reviewing Act 98 of 2012, reviewing who's on the board, and, it's largely statutorily based, or facts. So that's kind of the first bucket. The second bucket is, for instance, when we've had rules that have been updated or the secretary search, committees have done work, those committees tend to get invited in to talk about the work that they've done. And again, past tense, this is work that's been done. So, the EQS committee went in and testified about the updates to Rule Series 2000. I think I went in on behalf of the 2200 committee to talk about updates to independent school rule approvals. Lyle, Jeno, Farrell, and I went in to talk about the secretary search. And again, this is something that was done. It wasn't like the board charged us to go in and testify, but it was work that we had completed as a board. And so again, pretty comfortable with going in and just accepting the invitation. And then the third bucket is, and it's really happened more this legislative session, given everything that's happening around education in the state, where we have been asked to opine on, what is the board's position on. And that to me feels like a very different issue where, I can be very clear that I'm the chair of the board, but this is my personal opinion, but I don't think that's what people want. I think, they want the board's position. And so, that's why we had a special meeting on February 3rd to talk about the board's response to the governor's education proposal, because Tammy and I had been invited in to testify, and, I was able to negotiate with House Ed a time to go in and testify that could happen after we were able to have the special meeting. So, and whether this will be of such importance in future years, I don't know, but it's definitely of importance now.
Yeah, so I was just looking for some clarification. So it's not as though somebody, I would be going in or another board member saying, hey, right now I'm 100% behind X, Y, and Z, but I haven't talked to anybody else. Those kinds of conversations aren't going to be happening before the committees, anything like that.
I would not expect that.
Okay.
No.
Okay. That was my concern. Okay, great.
Yeah. So like if Senate Ed invited Brian Campion to come in and talk about, what Brian Campion's position is.
Yeah, but I'm on the state board. That's the tricky part. That's where I'm worried. Yeah, I wouldn't want people, I wouldn't, I do think it's sort of like pulling, Justice Roberts off the court, it not exactly, far from it, but that's my worry. And I think there are times that this board really is going to needs to vote and share that vote and where we're at. And I frankly think that's what the education committees, are going to want. But I also completely understand sometimes, timing is tight and somebody just wants an update. That's one thing. but giving our, our opinion before everyone, I can see that becoming a problem personally.
So do you have, I mean, Tammy's been kind of taking notes about suggested language. And let me just tell you what I'm thinking. We've got a break coming up. What I'd like to do is, have this conversation and then maybe use the break to finalize the language and then revisit this agenda item after the break. But do you have a suggestion that we can try to incorporate, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm trying to wonder, I'm curious if everybody else has the similar concern, or if not, I mean, if I'm in the minority, I completely get it. Again, what I'm trying to, there are going to be some really possibly big issues where this board's opinion, the opinion of the board, is going to be asked. And I just worry about when folks go in. I don't see us as individuals in this role, but perhaps, and frankly, I don't think the chairs want us in there as individuals. Maybe we have some other kind of expertise, but.
May I jump in here? Brian, I mean, I'd be curious about so I think what you're saying is what we're trying to avoid with having right, is that I think there are sort of two streams here. We have some major issues, such as the governor's transportation proposal, and we Jennifer and myself, we did not go in to testify without having a meeting of the board. I think the purpose of the legislative committee is to try to put the board on more proactive footing with anticipating and monitoring the things that are going on in the legislature, so that we can so we're having updates and a conversation around those things. I don't think I think the language has been written quite carefully to make sure that the legislative committee does not speak for the full board, right? And that I think the goal here is that I think to your point, there is a lot of stuff going on, and I think there's going to be more stuff going on. But right now we're kind of flat-footed, right? Like we're in a very reactive mode. It's only when something pops up. And I think what we're trying to do is have a committee that's monitoring what's going on, that's having that conversation, and then flagging in advance for the board, here are major issues where we need to have a more formal discussion, so that, by the way, that discussion happens in the public domain so people can see that discussion, and then sort of that can inform any future testimony that would go forward. So I think we're all saying the same thing, but I think again, I just want to clarify over here.
Yeah,
the second thing I just want to clarify though is it like you sometimes I get called in to testify too, right? And I am always very clear when I'm not speaking for the board. I think that's the other tension that we have to make sure that happens here, right? Is that if one of the ed committees calls me in to talk about education finance, the first thing I say is I'm not here in my capacity as state board.
Yeah, I had heard somebody mention something about folks going in again without kind of, a board vote and, having the opportunity to discuss things and hammer things out as a board. And that's just where I got worried. But it does sound like we're all moving in the same direction.
Yeah, the language here says, right, the committee is responsible for following legislative matters that may impact the board's action or responsibilities, reporting back to the full board at regular intervals, right, facilitating the board's discussion on those. And then again, if the board is voted on an issue, then to communicate, to help sort of shape the communication around that. So I think it's really clear in here that if there's some matter of substance on which the board is going to testify and that this committee is involved, they could help shape that, right? Shape that conversation for the board.
Right.
But it is stated in here that there would be a full board vote of that. But I also could imagine a situation where these are very complex issues, and the legislative committee can be proactive in trying to help the board, like, here are the key concerns, here are the key materials you need to read, things along those lines.
Yeah. I'm not concerned about the first part at all, Tammy. What I'm just concerned where it says suggest language that allows the committee to provide. That's where, again, my concern, really lies. But it sounds as though there again is that that caveat, people would go in and say, hey, if somebody's pulled in quickly and they need sort of an update on where the board is at some point, somebody would go in and say, hey, this is where we're at. But it's not as though you or I would be saying, this is where I'm leaning, this is where I'm going, but we don't have we haven't taken a vote. That is not going to happen. And that last thing suggests language that allows the committee to provide advice on legislative testimony, clarifies that where possible, the chair, that sounds to me, that last and it sounds as though we're getting it in the discussion, sounded as though we were getting into opportunities or possibilities where somebody might go in and represent folks and kind of say, hey, this is my thought, but we haven't taken a full vote. That's where my concern really lies. I completely get the first part. Sounds brilliant. I think it's terrific. I think people need that update.
So, and I think what Gray was getting at is maybe a half step, and Gray, correct me if I'm wrong, but it would allow the committee to go in and represent the committee's discussion and reflections. But so now you've got 4 people, but you've got a committee maybe expressing its opinion with the caveat that it needs to be clear that this is not the full board's decision. So,
I mean, again, I would say that is, I could be wrong, tricky territory, a small subset of the whole state board. That's pretty powerful when a committee goes in and says, we're unanimous, but we haven't, run this by our colleagues. First of all, what if all of a sudden it's on the front page of Digger, then we're creating this and other people aren't feeling that way. You can see where, some divisiveness and things could start to happen. So that is a real concern.
And that gets me back to, I want to be really, really clear that we are not creating an executive committee that is being charged with speaking on behalf of the board when the board has not had a conversation. That to me feels like not something that I think our board is set up to do. I mean, we
Right.
are.
I mean, we have subcommittees on, sometimes on committees in the legislature, and I wouldn't want them going to the governor's office saying, we've met, we haven't run it by everybody else, but the 3 of us are, that's my worry. And it sounds to me like I shouldn't be worried that would happen.
But I hear your point that language.
I know we have other hands up, Brian, and maybe when we listen to the other folks, if you could give us specific language or specific edits to this and come back, that would be helpful. I understand your points. I think they're good points. I'm struggling to know sort of what language we need to tweak, and then I can write it. I can put something on the screen.
Well, and I think what I'm hearing you say is that you're not comfortable with the suggested language that's under there.
Yeah, I mean, thanks. I appreciate it, Jennifer. Yeah, I get the other part, the reporting part, the back and forth, the dialogue, the following everybody. It's a great idea. It's that group of people going before the state board. Really, if you just if you keep that initial language, that sounds perfect. But subcommittees going before, the committees on education to say these are our thoughts, but we haven't run them by. We don't have a full vote. We're unanimous. That kind of stuff is concerning to me.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Mohammed, and then Cynthia, and then Gray.
I haven't double checked the Robert rules around this yet, but all this makes me wonder whether we could, or if there is, a policy that states any committee that needs the board to testify should have at least 3 days, 4 days, a week, a certain number of hours before they actually come to testify. Let's say, could there be a possibility we come up with a policy that say the State Board of Education cannot or shall not testify to any entity unless given a week notice, which would allow us to meet around any issue that is presented to us for discussion and ultimately voting on it. Is that a possibility? Is that something we should be doing?
Well, I think the risk there is that, you know, if we limited ourselves and our availability, we might get passed over. And just again, going back to our February 3rd meeting, you know, Tammy and I were approached by House Ed to come in, and I was able to negotiate with them, you know, pushing out that time, because I said, you know, the full board hasn't had a chance to speak about this. I would love to be able to warn a meeting. And of course, you know, we have to provide 48 hours notice to warn a meeting unless it's an emergency. And so, you know, I was able to, and, you know, like committees are pretty understanding about that. So I think I wouldn't want to have a bright line saying, you know, we can't come in for at least a week, or, you know, we need a week's notice, because I think that would maybe paint us into a corner in certain situations that I wouldn't want to, you know, be boxed in by that. If there was something really critical, I wouldn't want to say we can't testify because we have a rule that says that we need a week. I mean, that's just me. Cynthia, and then Gray. And then I'd like
When
to,
I'm
sorry, it is 9:50, so I think I'm gonna, you know, have you and Gray talk, and then maybe just reflect with the board where we are, because we are at time on this issue, and we can decide whether we want to continue talking or maybe close it out.
When I'm looking at this language, I'm fine with the language the way it's written, that it says, you know, in the event that members go before the General Assembly, the committee members, they can summarize the board's decision, discussion or board decisions. What I was concerned with is when the committee of 4 is actually going in and saying, as a 4-member committee, they have, you know, made decisions or have come to conclusions without the full participation of all board members. That doesn't feel comfortable to me.
Thank you. Gray?
I'll repeat what I said before and say again, I don't think the suggestion was ever for a committee to be making decisions. And I know we had the same discussion, excuse me, last meeting about what the purpose of the committee would be. And, you know, there are going to be times where there has to be testimony and the entire board cannot be, you know, consulted. That happens already. That's just the reality. So there has to be an in-between, and there is right now. And right now it's just that the chair and vice chair are gonna, it's not making decisions. It's, you know, it's not like you're choosing between apples and oranges. And if we don't have the board, we're gonna go, okay, just the 2 of us or just the 4 of us are gonna choose, right? It's just a discussion about things that the board have always talked about. And I do like the language here, summarization of the board's are like discussions. There's not going to be ideally anything that like any new ideas or any new decision making coming from either right now how we have it of just the chair and the vice chair, or from a legislative committee. It's you know, discussing ideas that have already been discussed and the with the full board. And either way, no matter how we look at it, even if we still view that as a problem, the creation of the legislative committee only continues to help that problem by expanding the amount of people that are talking about that issue, right? It doesn't actually add any group that would talk about things that wouldn't otherwise talk about things that then are testified on, if that makes any sense, right? Because that's already happening, just with an even smaller group. So I don't see why this would have a negative effect.
Thanks. Okay, so we are at time on our agenda with this item. So let me pause. Tammy has added in, just you can see in purple, a small modification. So let me just entertain a motion to approve the language that is on the screen with the modification in purple noted by Tammy. Is there a motion?
I'll move to, for us to accept the language, creating a legislative reporting committee as proposed by the chair, and with the small modification that reflects the conversation we just had.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. I saw Tom, I heard Lyle. Any further discussion?
Quick question.
Yes.
Jennifer, as the chair, this in no way sort of is circumventing the possibility of you going. I mean, you are the chair, so it's all of these things will still run through you, etc. Great.
Yes. Yeah, and we also have, and I was thinking about this because you and Cynthia, we're trying to sort of create a repository of like official board policies. And one of them is, and this is only slightly related, but it deals with speaking to the press or members of the public. And it's been a long time since I've looked at this, but the rule is, you know, if you were approached by a reporter, you would direct the reporter to me as the chair of the board, so that, you know, I speak on behalf of the board. So this, I mean, I don't know if that gets at what you're asking. I mean, like, I'm still the chair and I can still speak, you know, as the chair of the board.
Yeah, you know, if all of a sudden, you know, one of us is the chair of this new committee, again, they're going to keep going to you. You're the chair. This in no way is circumventing that. So this looks good to me. This feels much more comfortable, just as is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the motion, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Okay, we have adopted the language as proposed in the motion. Thank you.
And Maureen, I will email it to you, okay?
And Tammy, thank you again for scribing there. Okay, so this brings us next to the update on the Commission of Future on the Future of Public Education in Vermont. So I've got a few updates, just kind of in general. So the commission is now meeting twice a month. There are so we had a full commission meeting on March 3rd, and again this past Monday, the 17th. And then we had a steering group meeting also on March 17th, directly after the full commission meeting. So the March 3rd commission meeting, we had a legislative update that's starting to be a regular update at the sort of beginning of our meetings. So I can just reflect back, you know, what I heard from House Chair of Education, Peter Conlon, that, you know, the House Ed Committee is considering H454, which is the governor's education transformation proposal, and making changes to it. House Ed is also looking at this proposal as a 5-year implementation plan with certain things that would kind of be in place for the first year, but then a 5-year rollout. And this is just, you know, from the perspective of House Ed. House Ways and Means is considering various funding formulas beyond the one that was proposed in the education transformation proposal. And House Commerce and Economic Development is reviewing how CTE will fit into the plan, because that was not included in the education transformation proposal. There was also discussion that the commission's charge will probably be changed, in part because we had originally been requested to submit a report with an October deadline. I think the landscape changed when the governor sort of put forth this proposal, and I think it's pretty clear from the legislature that it is no longer expecting the commission to prepare a formal report, and we're sort of pivoting, although it's not fully clear yet how, but pivoting to be more incrementally responsive instead of waiting until October to come up with a formal report. That doesn't seem to be as helpful at this point. The commission's chair, Megan Roy, has been providing regular updates to the legislature just to kind of report back on commission meetings. And there seems to be an increased focus on the public engagement part of things, of really, you know, on the one hand, soliciting feedback from members of the public, particularly groups that have been historically marginalized or not included in this process, and really making an effort, whether that is, translating into different languages, the commission's charge, and, having that outreach, facilitating members of the public being able to provide that feedback. So we now have a consultant, Afton Partners, to help with the communication and engagement, and they are charged both with following up with groups that were listed in the enabling language that created the commission. There's, I think, like a dozen different organizations that are supposed to be approached. So Afton Partners will be reaching out to those groups, as well as figuring out how to approach the groups that have not been included, but whose voices are still really important to this work. At our March 3rd meeting, we also had a pretty detailed conversation about governance. And commission members, went around to say, what are we trying to achieve with changes to our governance structure? What are we giving up with changes to the governance structure? And one of the commission members, I think, framed it pretty well when he said, are we looking for evolutionary change or revolutionary change? Because different proposals seem to fall in different camps. So you have the write-ups of that conversation in the minutes about the governance conversation. And then at our meeting this past Monday on the 17th, again, we had a legislative update, and Chair Conlon reported that the foundation formula is still in the learning phase. They're really still trying to figure out, because there are different ways, and Tammy, you could speak to this. There are different ways to create a foundation formula. The one proposed by the governor is what's called an evidence-based formula, which really starts with an ideal and then works sort of down. There are other models, professional-based model, which, kind of takes where we are and, works toward a goal. So just a different way of approaching. I may not have gotten that right because I see Tammy's brows furrowed.
I created a side-by-side matrix that explains the three dominant approaches, and I'm happy to share that with the board if you're curious. I'm also happy to talk to the board about sort of the different strategies for foundation.
Sure.
But what has been used, right? So we have two potential studies that are floating around right now, right? We have the 2017 PICUS study, which is updated, and that used an evidence-based model. The evidence-based model, in short, looks at a bunch of research and says, these are all the things that we think are effective, and we pile them all into one school, and then we cost it out. There is no school in reality that has all those things, and it's certainly evidence-based, but it also means that you've got to make sure you get all the pieces in there, right? And some of the critiques of the numbers that have come out on the evidence-based model that informed the governor's proposal is that not all the pieces that are part of Vermont's education system in there. There's also some critique of some assumptions around school size that don't exist and things along those lines. We also have a 2018 study, which I authored, which used a cost function approach. That is a dominant approach used by other states, where you model what exactly it takes to get certain outcomes based on high-performing schools. It uses sort of statistical models. It's well accepted in the field as well. Those numbers generate a very different set of a base spending amount and very different weights than what have been proposed by the governor's approach. There's a third approach called the professional judgment approach. Usually the evidence-based approach or the cost function approach is paired with a professional judgment approach. In this case, the evidence-based approach was not paired with a professional judgment approach. Since the 2018 study was done just to update weights, it wasn't paired with a professional judgment approach because it wouldn't have been appropriate at this time. But if we used a cost function approach going forward, it would be appropriate to pair that with a professional judgment approach. And so those are the three legs of the stool. They interact they interact in different ways, and they all have their pros and cons. And if you're curious, I can provide you a one-pager that summarizes how each of them works and what their pros and cons are.
That would be awesome, Tammy, if you wouldn't mind. I know you've spent a lot of time testifying in your
It's in
other,
it's in my slides that I provided when I did the joint testimony between for Ways and Means and House Ed, but I can pull it out for there too.
thanks. Okay, where was I? Okay, so House Ways and Means which is chaired by Emily Kornheiser, who also briefly spoke at the March 17th meeting. They are looking in detail at what makes a good foundation formula. And specifically, I think they have asked for a range of numbers of districts. So the governor's plan recommends 5 districts. I think the Vermont Superintendents Association recommended 11, I want to say, something more. And there is also, I've heard a lot of people saying that a good district size is roughly 4,000 kids. So House Ways and Means has asked for different numbers of districts, and then they want to run the numbers on each of those models to see, how the cost breaks out.
And that 4,000 number, by the way, Jennifer, comes from peer-reviewed studies, right? And so I'm happy, if that's helpful, I'm happy to share with you the peer-reviewed studies that show that.
Okay, thank you. Chair Kornheiser also noted that there are 4 bills that are being considered by House Ways and Means. 2 are focused on improving the property tax system to make it more equitable across the state. And this, I'm hearing a lot of support for this, dividing up our non-resident property tax rate. So right now there's either a homestead tax rate or a non-homestead tax rate. And if it's not your primary residence, it's taxed as, the non-homestead tax rate. But that includes farms, businesses, affordable housing, second homes. I mean, it all kind of gets lumped into that non-homestead tax rate. And I think what the legislature is looking at is subdividing those categories so that there would be, multiple tax rates within that umbrella of non-resident tax rate. They are also focused on developing an income-based homestead exemption and also the foundation formula. So House Ed has also identified some quick wins that they would like to push through this legislative session, including a statewide calendar and a common set of graduation requirements. And with regard to the commission itself, Megan Roy reported back that she's heard from House Ways and Means, House Ed, and Senate Finance that there is an important role for the commission to play going forward, especially with public engagement on specific issues such as special education, what quality means, how to measure that, etc. And then I'll just kind of conclude with the steering group meeting that happened right after the commission meeting. And Chair Roy is looking at re-engaging the subcommittee structure to accomplish more. The committees are not yet defined, but will probably break down upon the 3 pillars that have been identified by the commission. So one committee will probably be focused on governance, one will be focused on finance, and one will be focused on quality. That breakdown and committee charges will be proposed at our next meeting on April the 7th. And just as an FYI, that April 7th meeting will be in South Burlington in person from 1 to 4, and the plan is to include a public engagement session to follow from 5 to 7 p.m. So I just threw a whole bunch of stuff at everyone. And Zoe, welcome. I will start with Zoe and then Lyle. And if there are other questions, go ahead and raise your hand.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Just wanted to provide a bit more context regarding the conversations that have been ongoing with the commission. So over the past several months, the agency has provided a number of trainings around a foundation formula and the different methodologies for developing a foundation formula. The governor's approach is informed by the evidence-based model. I do want to note that we have been explicit around the adjustments that have been made within that model to fit within the Vermont context, and also relative to school size. There are adjustments that are built into the modeling to understand the different costs of operating a small school. So there are a number of details that I can share around what went into that modeling. The adjustments were made also with an understanding of some other states that have been using the evidence-based model and making adjustments to kind of meet current needs of students. Additionally, adjustments were made to address some of the priorities that we heard through the Listen and Learn tour to ensure that the funding was supportive of meeting the holistic needs of students as were defined through the intensive engagement through the Listen and Learn tour. So certainly it's always helpful to provide additional background and understanding. I appreciate Tammy's work in testifying, and as she noted, there's pros and cons to every approach. I think it's just important that we all have a really are grounded in a complete understanding of what's proposed currently. Additionally, we've, as the Agency of Education is aware that there are other district configurations that are being considered, and we are open certainly to exploring those beyond the 5-district model. We've said that multiple times, and we've created a rubric to evaluate what the different impact would be. So this proposal that has been put forward is comprehensive and looks at 3 policy levers. So any adjustment to one lever can make an adjustment to the others. And so we are providing that as a resource to be methodical as we evaluate different inputs and adjustments that are being considered, and ultimately really evaluating those relative to the express objectives of the plan. We've also acknowledged that the legislature may have additional objectives. And so expect that that rubric will also be refined as those are articulated, so we can evaluate the extent to which adjustments will help to meet those shared goals. Also, I just want to correct for the record that the governor's plan does focus on career and technical education. In fact, it's an express priority to expand college career and technical education within the plan. That is explicitly defined in terms of the funding formula and building in additional resources to ensure students in middle school benefit and can access early career exploration coursework, and that there's additional staffing in 9th and 10th grade to also support that. Additionally, funding has been recommended at the tech centers, and there is within this construct an expectation of shared responsibility between the tech center and the district in ensuring that the funding is appropriately resourcing the district and the CTE center to support the needs of students. So just wanted to clarify that CTE is absolutely a priority within the proposal. What is indicated is a further analysis around kind of governance structure, specifically to thinking about it as a single district or an education service agency, and being able to further refine that. I want to emphasize that the proposal put forward is a multi-year proposal, so it's 4 years. So I heard interest in the House being 5 years, and so those are also things that are under consideration as we begin to get more refined and finite around the specific steps within the transition. But I also want to call out that any multi-year plan is going to be longer than 4 or even 5 years, right? I think the timetable as we're thinking about the kind of initial timing is around making that transition to a different funding system. But really the transformation and the strengthening of our system will continue to evolve, and there will continue to be opportunities thereafter to optimize our entire public education system. So just wanted to make a couple of those notes and just reinforce that we're actively collaborating and getting input and are really encouraged, I think, by the conversation and the focus on incorporating the feedback to get this right for Vermont students.
Thanks. Lyle?
Well, this may be a question of Zoe. Thank you for that information. I think I heard you say that there's a rubric comparing the district proposals, whether it's 5, 11, whatever. There was some legislation that proposed that the districts be composed of schools within a tech center region. Is that on one of the, is that on the rubric? Is that being considered?
And so all of them that have been put forward, we're in the process of considering and evaluating. There are a couple outstanding questions around how kind of money flows and operationalizing that for us to fully evaluate. But yes, that is what we're doing. And as new proposals are put forward, we're kind of adding another column to that rubric to further evaluate. So we hope that that'll be a helpful resource.
And one piece, if I may, Jennifer, with the way the tech center districts or regions are set up now, there is already a transportation process in place to get students to the tech center. So it's certainly valuable to look at.
And transportation is coming up pretty consistently as it relates to the tech center. So thank you for mentioning that, Lyle.
Thanks. Other comments, questions? All right. Well, if there are none, we can turn it over to Zoe for the secretary's report. And let me just take a moment here. Zoe was confirmed by the Senate, was it last week? I think so. Congratulations. So Zoe, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And want to also extend my welcome to our new school board members, Cynthia and Brian. Welcome. I look forward to working with you on the board and to learning your input as we move forward. Welcome. For my update today, I'll be focused and brief on really 3 primary updates, and then welcome any questions that you might have. First, I want to communicate our process for reviewing directives that are coming from Washington, D.C. We are taking a very disciplined approach to evaluating these updates that are coming to us through executive orders, dear colleague letters, in reviewing them to provide then updates to the field around any potential impacts. We have been providing weekly updates through our current forms of communication to the field. We have received feedback that may not be getting to everyone. So actually today we'll be launching a new part of our website that will contain those updates and will be updated as we're getting information. And our main focus is reviewing that and being able to understand the impacts to Vermont schools and providing guidance to the field so that there is clarity. So just wanted to make the board aware that we have a dedicated team that is proactively reviewing and monitoring different direction coming from the federal government, and that we're staying disciplined in providing that all the updates to the field. When that link goes live, I'll make sure that the board has access to it, and that'll be a helpful resource, hopefully for you as well. I know that you are probably getting a lot of questions as education leaders, and so we hope that this will also be a tool and a resource for you to orient Vermonters to the information in reviewing those impacts. The second update is related to the independent school approval process. As I've noted on multiple occasions, addressing the backlog is one of my priorities. So we have put together an update for you on where we are with that process. I did share just, I think right before the meeting, a memo. I'm monitoring this on a very frequent cadence to ensure that we're on track to deliver on the timeline. I also will have another update. I think the next meaningful time to have an update would be on probably May 15th, after May 15th, to give you a sense of where we are. The report that we shared provides an overview of our, again, refresher on how we are addressing the backlog. It outlines what actions have been taken to date, and it enumerates the next steps as part of our review process, as we've shared before, we're looking at the reviews in 3 different categories. And there are associated timelines with those reviews. Additionally, within that report, you'll see a list of the schools, which has further specificity around our process. We do have some of our team members from our independent schools team on the line. I also want to make note that I've identified additional resources to supporting this team, specifically a dedicated resource from our special education team to support with the monitoring. And there's been really effective collaboration across our teams to supporting this work.
And
So I
so
will,
if I may
yeah.
just interrupt, is I had not seen this. You had sent an email to board members a little bit less than an hour ago with those materials that you're referring to. So board members, there are a couple of documents from the secretary in your email inbox.
So, and we'll, my plan would be just to continue, as you'll see there, we've on the documents outlined some of the critical time points. And so I will furnish updates to the board in writing as we're moving forward with the process, just so that there is full transparency. My intention for today is just to give you, reinforce that this is one of my priorities, to give you documentation of where we are now. We are on track, and to outline those next steps so you know what to anticipate. I welcome, to review those documents and share any additional questions you might have for me that you would like me to address at a subsequent meeting, but I wanted us to at least get started on a regular cadence of providing those updates. The second update is related to the career and technical education. So we've already talked about what a priority that is. I think that's really a priority statewide. We heard that loudly through our Listen and Learn tour, that Vermonters really care about opportunities to expand career and technical education. The state board has rightly identified that the rule series 2370 is overdue for revision. I know that a committee has already been established to reviewing that. We are in an interesting place as we think about modernizing our rules, because we're also actively working with the General Assembly to make some very significant statutory improvements for CTE. So we have outlined an approach that we would like for the committee to review, along with a recommended timeline. Should we move forward with more substantive CTE policy changes this session, there will be a lot of additional updates to the rules that would be required. In the interim, we've identified some revisions that could, address outdated language, ensure that there's alignment between Vermont's CTE regulatory framework and Perkins, and more fully align the rules with current practices. So what you'll see in that document is really designed to be a resource for that committee to identify those areas where we can do some updates in the absence of statutory changes. But I would just recognize that really for us, I think to achieve the full goals of what we've expressed for CTE, it will require statutory changes. And so there's kind of some strategy and beginning to kind of think through this work, but timing it in a way so that we're really anticipating and understanding the extent of revisions that would be required for rulemaking. So I share that as a resource. I'd also be happy to, attend the committee meeting to walk through that with our CTE team, including Ruth Durkee, our state director, so that there's full clarity. But what you'll see in the document that we have shared is we've broken it out by the specific components of the rule series, and within that, we've identified what would be short-term considerations for change and what would need to be longer term, which would require broader statutory reform. So hopefully that's a helpful reference. The other reference we do have for the committee is a report that APA produced related to the analysis of the funding and governance changes for CTE. I think it'd be quite helpful for the committee to review that. It also enumerates the specific updates that would be required for state board rulemaking within those recommendations. So those were the key updates I had for today.
Thank you. So board members, any questions for Zoe, either about what's coming out of Washington, independent school approvals process, or CTE rule updates? Tom, and then Tammy.
Thank you, Zoe. Yeah, a couple questions. I'm wondering about, just thinking about our subcommittee work, when we will be receiving reports from the agency. I'm also just quickly looking at this memo, and I admit I have not done a thorough look at it. I'm curious about St. Johnsbury being listed as a therapeutic school, and why that is in that list under therapeutic.
Thank you for those questions. I'm going to ask Lori Dolezal, who leads our education quality team, to respond to those specific questions.
Hi, everyone. Regarding the first question, I would suspect that you would see some of the reports coming through May. So the deadline is April 1st for submissions. And some of the reports will be more expedited than others, depending on whether a site review is required. So you should see some of those submissions coming in May. And then I would say for those with completed site visits coming in June. And then of course there'll be a summer gap and things will pick up again in September. I also don't expect we would see any major issues with the submissions this year, given the amount of guidance, the customized technical assistance, and the office hours that have been provided or are being provided. And the second question regarding the St. Johnsbury, I'm going to defer to the team and see if that was an error or if there's any clarification on that listing. I think
Good morning, this is Pat.
Hi, Pat.
If it did indeed say that St. Johnsbury Academy is a therapeutic school, that is incorrect. Okay, it must have been a mistake on our part, and we'll take a look at that list and double check it again. And thanks for bringing that up, Tom.
You're welcome.
And Pat, just a point of clarification, it's not a therapeutic school. Is it listed as a CTE exclusive school as well? I've seen it also on a list that way too. And I know, Tom, that's not the case as well. So I'm just wondering if we've got some reporting errors here.
It is listed as an approved independent school eligible to receive public funding.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm wondering, can you remind us, because I don't see it in the document, how you're categorizing the schools into category 1, category 2, and category 3?
Sure. Category 1 are the 13 schools that have submitted an application, have gone through a site review, and then there was a halt in the process because of the change in the rules. So they received a copy of the standard application to complete. We'll review the standard application to determine if they meet all of the requirements from July of 23 and July of 24. If they have, an addendum to their report will be completed, then vetted in-house, and then sent to the school for review. And then once we receive the school's response, it could be sent to the subcommittee for their review. Okay. Category 2 schools are those schools that were sent an application, the old application, let me tell you that. And they submitted that application, but the application was not reviewed and no site visits were completed. Category 3, all the other schools that never received an an application because there was a pause in the process. That includes schools with 23, 24, and 25 expiration dates.
Thank you. So yeah, I think where the confusion maybe with Tom is you have a sentence under category 2 schools that says these therapeutic school reviews. And I don't, these are not necessarily therapeutic schools. They're just schools that, you know, they're categories 2 schools because of the application process.
Exactly what I was going to pick up on, Jennifer, and I think it's a matter of clarifying that description around category 2 as Pat has expanded upon so that there is no confusion around that list of schools. So we can make that update. I think it's more descriptive in nature, and it's not indicating that St. Johnsbury is a therapeutic school.
Thanks. Tammy?
Sort of shift questioning. I just want to make sure we're all done on questions around independent schools. Does anybody else have this? I want to shift the topic. Okay, so I'm curious. I heard you and others on VPR earlier this week, and you know we now have the budget reconciliation bill that's out in the public that just came from the feds. I'm curious, sort of what planning is the agency doing right now for the change in the special education formula? Right, so the dollars in the budget reconciliation bill are not going to come through IDA, right? They're going to come through a separate budget separate line item, and every state is going to have to choose whether or not it complies with IDA, and that has implication for our rules. I'm just curious, I didn't hear that mentioned in any of your comments. I didn't hear that in your update, and that seems like that's a really important thing for the state board to be considering since we have the special education rules.
So, I mean, I think what VPR is kind of broader conversation, right? The questioning
No, I
is
was referring
around.
to your comments on VPR, not Heckinger, not the Heckinger. I was talking about your comments. You had mentioned that you didn't think there were any implications for Vermont in the near term, but now that we have the Budget Reconciliation Act and we know, right, that the dollars are largely going to go outside the formula, right? And the only reason that any state has to comply with IDA is if they get the dollars through the formula. And so they're going to run the dollars outside the formula, which means Vermont's going to have the choice of whether or not to comply with IDA. And that has real implications for our special education rules that are under the state board's purview. So I'm just curious, can you give us an update on your thinking on that?
Yeah, so just for a correction, what we said is we don't, in the near term, don't expect substantive funding changes and allocations for the 2025-26 school year, but that there is considerable uncertainty around the 26-27 school year. In terms of the actual flexibility that states will now have in terms of distributing funds, I think that's more the nature of your question. And if there's implication of rulemaking, I'm happy to take that as a question and be able to more fully respond to that comprehensively to ensure that there's clarity around any updates that may be required to rulemaking, along with some of the choices that states are contemplating regarding kind of different distributions of the funding.
Yeah, because that'll have implications for our special ed rules, our 2200 rules, right? And especially, right, if there are conditions put on those dollars, which I think we can anticipate around school choice and education savings accounts, those dollars could get cordoned off, right? And not flow. First of all, they're not going to flow through the regular formula, right? And so every district in the state will be impacted by that, in addition to these other requirements, which will have implications for our rules. So maybe we can check in on that at our next board meeting. I think that would be really helpful as we start to, I know it's certainly on the committee that's in charge of sort of thinking about this stuff. It'd be really helpful to understand sort of what the agency's recommendations are going to be on that, so we can be in an anticipatory stance with respect to the rules.
Yeah, and I mean, you're rightly pointing out that the landscape is changing. And so there are key decisions that states need to make. And we are actually really engaged right now with the Council of the CCSSO group, which is an organization of state chiefs. There's a policy planning meeting coming up actually next week. that our teams are involved in. So this is very much a focus of our work in ensuring that the agency is supporting the readiness of our state to be able to effectively leverage these federal dollars and think intentionally and strategically around how to manage them, identifying some of the choices that you've laid out and some of the flexibility that we are anticipating and conditions, to your point.
Yeah, I know the CCSSO is meetings next week, so perhaps we can have an update on that in April, so we can start to sort of plan our cadence with respect to rulemaking coming up. Would that be possible?
We can certainly provide an update on, what we have learned. We expect that any updates will also be shared with the field. We are really committed to having that regular cadence. I think your specific question around any implications for rulemaking, I want to understand kind of the timeline of when we'll have a meaningful update on that. But I certainly next month can provide an update on what we've learned and what we're anticipating.
Great. Other questions for Zoe? And I think too, I appreciate, Zoe, you sending out the materials to the board with regard to the independent school approvals and CTE. So I think, board members are just going to need some time to digest that. And what I might suggest is if there are questions that maybe board members could email those to Zoe, copy Tammy and me on them just for, keeping us in the loop. But if you have questions that you would like Zoe to respond to at the next meeting, then Zoe, you'll have those questions in advance. And not that we'll cap the universe at any questions that are sent to you, but I think just recognizing the board members haven't had a chance to review those documents. I think if there are follow-up questions, you can feel free to send them to Zoe, and then Zoe, you can provide another follow-up at our next meeting.
Absolutely. And my intention was actually just kind of get us started on that process. I know that the board has not had an opportunity to fully review that, but wanted to give you a current state. The main takeaway is we feel like we're on track. We're giving you a sense of what those key next steps are, and welcome the questions in between so we can be responsive to that. And then the other document I included, I think is a really helpful reference more for the committee that's been formed around CTE, for that committee to dive deeper, and wanted to be able to share that information with the entire board.
Great. Thank you. Anything else before we move on? So this has not happened for a while. We are ahead of schedule. And let me just make a recommendation that we just continue on with our agenda, and we may not need a break and we might just adjourn early. Is that acceptable to everybody? All right. So this brings us to the election of officers. I think what I would like to do is, well, without speaking out of turn, Rich, were you going to nominate a slate? Because if that's the case, I would pass the gavel maybe. Well, I don't know if we can do that. I might pass the gavel to Tammy to handle the election of the chair, and then the chair will take the gavel back and handle the election of the vice chair.
Maybe the thing to do is to let Zoe, as she's got a new appointment to take charge of the meeting, and just ask for nominations for the chair. And then if somebody nominates a slate, she can accept that. And if everybody's good with it, then we can move on and save ourselves some time.
Is that acceptable to everybody?
It's usually not a member of the board. And, with nominations, you can also self-nominate yourself. So that's why it's always been recommended that it not be somebody from the board, so that in case they want to nominate themselves.
I'm a non-voting member of the board, and I am not planning to nominate myself.
Well, and you're really, since you're not a member,
Oh,
you're a disinterested person. So
So in terms of procedure, it would the first be for me to ask for nominations for chair? Is it the first order? Okay. So with that, I will ask the board to nominate candidates for chair of the State Board of Education.
I would like to nominate Jennifer.
I second that nomination.
So moved by Mohammed.
Would you like to take a roll call vote, or are there any other nominations?
Hearing none.
Hearing none, we will do the roll call at this point. No? Or
No,
it carries? Okay.
well, no, just if it's unanimous, so what I usually do is all those in favor say aye, and then you wait,
Okay.
but then it appears to be a unanimous decision in the affirmative, and you give people a few seconds to object, and if not, then it was a unanimous decision.
And I think that occurred organically, but I guess we can do it procedurally as well. All in favor of the recommendation for Jennifer Samuelson to be chair of the state board? Say aye.
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 Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks for letting us put you on the spot. You passed.
I will turn it back over to you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, and I was going to abstain, but then I ended up voting just so that we wouldn't have to go through the procedural hurdle of doing the roll call. So thank you. And let me just pause and thank each one of you for your confidence in me. This is not always an easy job. And I think it's fair to say I have grown a lot in this position. So it is not often at this point in one's life where one is called upon to grow like this. So this has been a really good thing, and I think it's really a privilege to be able to engage in this work. And I really appreciate the conversations that we have. They're not always easy, but I also feel like we often end up in exactly the right place, and so you can't get there without going through the path to get there. But just thank you all. I really do enjoy this work, and really it's an honor to work with each of you. Thank you. At this point, I will entertain a nomination for the position of vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Tammy Colby for vice chair.
I will second. Any other nominations? Hearing none, all those in favor of naming Tammy as the board's vice chair, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, Tammy, congratulations. Thank you for signing up
Thank you,
again.
and I voted for the same reason you did, Jennifer, so we didn't have to do the roll call. And thank you all for your confidence and our team here. Jennifer and myself, we very much are into serving our larger education community and also the board. So thank you for that opportunity.
All right. So the next thing I wanted to do is just a little bit of a housekeeping issue, which is just for posterity and to make sure that we're all on the same page, just to briefly review our State Board of Education committees as well as who's on them. I'm also going to note where we have vacancies. And I would say two things. One is if there is a committee to which you are currently assigned that you no longer wish to be on, please send me an email, let me know. If there is a committee to which you would like to be assigned, please send me an email or just tell me now. But it doesn't have to happen right now, but we do have some vacancies that I would love to get filled. So in no particular order, we have 5 committees now. We have first the Roles and Responsibilities Committee. This is charged with developing recommendations for full board action as it pertains to the role and function of the State Board of Education and constituting the state board's governance, including the need to create and or update bylaws, processes, and procedures, and other statutory responsibilities. This is co-chaired by Tammy and me. Mohammed is also on the committee. We now have a vacancy because Jenna is no longer on the board. So that's the first committee. The second committee is the Student Performance Standards Committee, which considers any performance standards that are brought before the board pursuant to 16 VSA section 164.9. That is chaired by Tammy and also includes Rich, Mohammed, and Gray. Next, we have the Rules Series 2200 Approvals Committee, which is charged with reviewing any request for approval or reapproval that comes before the board pursuant to Rule Series 2200. That is chaired by Tom. Lyle is also on that committee. And again, we have a vacancy because Jenna has stepped off the board. Fourth, we have a CTE update committee, which sounds like we'll be getting busy soon. And that is charged with considering changes to Rule Series 2370, our career and technical education rules, and manage the rulemaking process through to completion. That is chaired by Lyle, also includes Tammy, Tom, and Rich. And then we have our Legislative Review Committee, which we just created the charge at today's meeting. I think it makes sense that I will chair that or co-chair that with Tammy. And then we have space for 2 other members. So, no one has to say anything, but if you want to, yes, Rich.
So now that we've kind of reorganized and we have 2 new members, could I maybe suggest that we is if everybody maybe gave their 2 or sent you an email, gave you their 2 or 3 committees they want to serve on, even if it's one that they're on now, and then let you and Tammy review that and come back to us at the next meeting with the recommendation on where you want everybody, and then see how that plays out, and then you can rebalance the committees. I think he has some really good chairs, but with you 2 being chairs and or co-chairs of 2 of the committees, or 3 of the committees if you count the new legislative one, or I guess Tammy's on 3, but anyways, maybe you could rebalance it and make sure that we're distributing the work, and then people can maybe have a say, because I've always told you I'll serve on any committee, but I do have a couple that I like, and I'm sure everybody's the same way. And then that way it also kind of refreshes everything. And I don't think anything's really in the middle of any major topics, are they?
No, and maybe I like your suggestion, Rich. So 2 things. One is I pulled these charges from our prior meeting minutes and just brought them forward. What I will do is copy and paste this and send this to board members just so that you can see it. I like Rich's suggestion, so everyone can email me back before the next meeting with 2 or 3 committees that you would like to be associated with, assigned to. And what I will say is that for the next month until we meet in April, we will keep our committees the way they are. Which is to say, I mean, the one committee that actually really affects is the 2200 Approvals Committee. So Tom and Lyle, that would mean that you guys really wouldn't be able to do anything for the next month since you're currently a committee. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments? Does that seem like a good plan to everybody? All right.
Wait, so to be clear, we should email even if it's just a committee we're already on.
Correct. So you
Okay.
can confirm your interest in
Yeah.
the committee that you're currently on, or add to it or change it. Okay, great. So that brings us to future meeting planning, and let me just add committee review.
Hey, Jen, I got one other quick thing. I'm sorry. I had a note here and I missed it. Because I don't remember seeing, we have 2 student members, and I know only one gets the vote, but does it automatically, the non-voting member, when Gray graduates, he becomes a voting member?
Yes.
So I think that he should also weigh in on what committee he'd like to be on, and maybe he can be an auxiliary member. I don't know how you want to term it, so that you don't have to reassign it, and then come the end of June, he would be up to speed on that committee. I did find it was a little tough and if I didn't have Tammy and Kim, on the committee, having done a lion's share of the work and being so good at telling us what was going on, it was kind of hard to catch up in the middle of the committee.
Sure.
Yeah, I can
Yeah,
do that.
and Caleb, I mean, you're welcome to serve on a committee now. You just wouldn't be able to vote.
Yeah, I'm willing to do that. I'll let you know.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an important note about student members on committees, because the non-voting member can join committees, and also, and this was as sometimes when taken advantage of, they don't count towards a quorum, so they can be added as a fifth member, even if you already have a committee of 4 people, which I did do last year. I think we had a committee of 5 people.
Okay, anything else before we move on? Okay, so future meeting planning. We are hoping to be in person in Winooski in April. So much as we have done with, I'm really looking forward to it. Much as we've done with our other in-person meetings, what I'd like to do is allow board members time to travel because it always takes some people more time than others. We will start with a tour of the school. What I would ask, because this has kind of tripped us up in the past, if you are not able to attend the tour of the school, could you please let Maureen and Suzanne know? Because it helps with planning purposes. And I think there was one time we only had a couple people that, we might have restructured that if we'd known beforehand. So we'll do the tour of the school, we'll have lunch, and then we will have an early afternoon start for our meeting. And then just thinking ahead, our May meeting, I'd also like to have in person in Vergennes to honor Gray. So Gray, you can be anticipating that. Similar structure. And with specifics about what will be on our April agenda, I know that we will be expecting a quarterly update from Katie Ballard from the Special Education Advisory Panel. She was originally scheduled to come today, but was unable to do so. So, and it sounds like there's going to be a committee update or a panel update between this month and next month. So it would be a more fruitful update for her to come in April. So she's planning to be with us on April. We'll also have updates on the committees, board committees, based on our prior conversation. We'll have updates from Zoe based on any emails from board members based on today's conversation. We'll have a commission update. And if there's anything else board members would like to, well, and let me just say, I hope that there will be a presentation from Winooski on any topic of their choosing. We usually invite the schools to present to the board. But if there are any other issues that board members would like to include on the agenda, we don't have a whole lot, so we definitely have time to take up more. And you can let me know. So. Mohammed?
Yeah, I have a question about the visit to Winooski. By the way, welcome all to my world. I'm excited about it. If there is anything I need to know beforehand in help of prep, I'm happy to check in another time with you directly or email me around the presentation, maybe, unless you have already been talking with our executive assistant to the superintendent home.
So I know
planning as well.
I think Maureen and Suzanne have been reaching out to Winooski just to sort of set up the structure of the meeting. But Mohammed, if there are particular people that you think would be helpful in terms of making a presentation, if you want to connect those people with Maureen and Suzanne, they can follow up from there.
Sounds good. And speaking of presentations, do we have an idea of a time frame, like 10 minutes, 30, 45 minutes? Because we have so much that we can present, but we don't want to take up the whole meeting agenda as well. So if I'm given a time frame, I can absolutely try to work on that piece.
Okay.
The presentation, yeah.
I would say, 45 minutes plus or minus, and whether that's, one long presentation or two smaller, like however you want to work it.
Sounds
work it out.
good. That's very
Uh,
helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else?
Before you get to public, I'd like to thank our two new board members since they've really kept us on time. They've done a great job with that. So
Thanks. Gray?
Thank you, Richard. Thank you.
I have just I have some questions because I haven't been on the board long enough to see all of these procedures actually play out multiple times. But besides student members, typically it's that 2 board members are replaced every 2 years, right?
Well, we have the a slide with everyone's when they term off. Where it gets a little bit tricky is there are certain board members that stepped in to complete a prior board member's term. So, and I think at this point that includes Tammy, Rich, and me. So, well, Rich, you completed Oliver Olson's term and then you were reappointed. You're muted.
Yeah, I completed somebody's term, but I don't think I've been reappointed.
Well, I think, let me just pull it up.
We can handle that. We can, so I think the short answer to your question to Gray is there is sort of this, you can fill out somebody's term and get reappointed. And we have a number of people who are doing that right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And that always happens in March, the new board members come on, or is that at a
Well,
random time?
the 6-year term begins in March, where you are appointed to fill out someone else's term. That really happens when that vacancy occurs. So for instance,
Yeah.
I came on board in August of 2020.
Yeah, but usually in March. And then are the elections every 2 years in March for
Yes.
chair and vice chair? Okay. Well then, I just noticed today, I mean, it obviously wasn't an issue because we had unanimous elections, but I don't know if there's any way to change that in some way, but isn't it a little strange to have new members come on at the same time we have an election on chair and vice chair? I don't know if anyone feels the same way about that, but because the idea is that you're supposed to know a little bit about the people that you're voting on. Is there a way to shift that, or does anyone else feel similarly about that?
Well, Kim had raised that same issue last month. Rich?
yeah, usually the reason you have the elections is because when you have a new board, the board organizes themselves. So, and that's why you don't have a whole new board ever come on all at one time, because it would be difficult to do that. So the 2 new board members, you usually just, they're kind of taking their cue from the other people and they're learning, but you're supposed to, when you have new, technically, every time you have a new board member come on, you're supposed to reorganize, but in some boards, it makes it really difficult. But that the idea is that, in especially in elected boards, when new people are elected, then the board organizes themselves. There's not an election to vote the chairman of a school board or a supervisory board. It's a board that reorganizes themselves. So that's why you will always have the vote at the time the term changes over.
Okay.
Yeah, we just had our reorganizational meeting for my school board last night and same thing.
Did you win last night too, Jen?
I did.
Look at that, 2 wins in 2 days. You're better than Celtics and the Boston Bruins this year.
I'm busy. Okay, so if there's no other comments on our agenda, I will turn it over to public to be heard. If there are any members of the public who wish to address the board, you can raise your hand through the Teams platform or *5 on your phone. Kim.
Folks, thanks for letting me listen in. I was just going to ask that the materials that Zoe referenced be attached to the meeting materials.
Yeah, I think
in her secretary report. And I know one of them is here, the one on CTE, but not a link. And it sounds like there were others that update the renewal cadence. I think that's important public information.
Yeah, those will definitely be included.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public? All right. Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Tammy.
Seconded by Mohammed.
All righty. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we stand in adjournment. Thank you all very much. Have a great afternoon.
See you in Winooski next month.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.